Leah had called me earlier. "You need to write a letter to the girl left at the altar," she said. "But no names. Don't go after him. Don't go after her. Make it about you, not him. You're the story." I took a deep breath. She was right. It couldn't be about them. It couldn't be about Tyler and Tessa. It had to be about me, about how I felt, how it felt to be discarded, to have your life completely upended by someone you trusted. I began typing. At first, the words were slow, hesitant, like I was dipping my toes into something too big, too raw to fully process. But then it all came flooding out. I wrote about the jokes that weren't jokes, the ones that made me shrink, the ones that made me question my worth. I wrote about how I'd spent so much of myself trying to fit into the world Tyler wanted to create, how I had become smaller with every passing day to make space for his dreams. I wrote about the moment I realized he didn't see me as a partner. He saw me as practice for someone else, someone who looked better on his LinkedIn profile. I didn't name names. I didn't mention Tyler or Tessa, but anyone who knew us could connect the dots. The post was a mirror, one I was holding up not just to him, but to myself. I stared at the words, my heart racing as I reached the end. I hovered over the publish button, my stomach twisted. What if I'm making a mistake? What if Harriet calls me? What if Tyler sues me? The thought of it made my skin crawl. People were going to say I was airing dirty laundry. They were going to say I was looking for attention. I could already hear the whispers. But then, the memory of that group chat came rushing back. The words Tyler had written, the way he'd reduced me to nothing more than a stepping stone, the cruelty, the callousness, the cold detachment. And suddenly, I didn't care anymore. I had been silenced for too long. The truth was mine, and I wasn't going to let it sit in the shadows any longer. I clicked publish. The phone buzzed in my hand almost immediately. Leah's message popped up. "It's live." I sat back, my breath caught in my throat. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. The post wasn't just live, it was out there. My words, my truth were out there for the world to see. I couldn't take it back now. At first, it was just a trickle. A few friends shared it, some acquaintances who had been following my blog for a while. But then, just a few hours later, someone with a mid-sized following retweeted a quote from my post. "Being left at the altar didn't make me unlovable. It just made him honest sooner." And then it exploded. Comments started flooding in. Some were kind, some were messy, and some were downright cruel. "You must not have been enough," one comment read. Another person wrote, "You're better off without him. You don't deserve that." And then there were others, strangers, people I didn't know, telling me their own stories of abandonment, of being betrayed. Some thanked me for sharing my truth, telling me it was what they'd been too afraid to say out loud. Others shared their pain, their heartbreak, their fear of being discarded. I cried. And then I laughed. It wasn't just for me anymore, it was for everyone who had ever felt silenced, dismissed, or discarded. My post wasn't just a confession, it was a declaration that I was done being the silent one, the quiet victim. I was taking back the power, one word at a time. I sent Leah an email. "Okay, it's out. Now what?" And I sat there, waiting, knowing that something had shifted, that something deep inside of me had cracked wide open, and there was no going back. Now I understand. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is not just speak your truth, but to make sure it's heard. I sat in my apartment, the fridge humming in the background, a dull sound that only made the silence feel heavier. The smell of cold takeout lingered in the air, mixing with the musty feeling of an unventilated room. The only light came from my desk lamp, casting long shadows that stretched across the floor. It was the kind of silence that felt too loud, like everything was waiting for me to make a decision. My phone buzzed twice, but I ignored it. I didn't want distractions. Not now. The blank post editor on my screen mocked me. The cursor blinked, daring me to type something meaningful. My fingers hovered over the keys. At first I thought maybe 50 people would read this, just a handful of curious friends or acquaintances. But deep down, I knew it could be bigger. It was raw, it was real. I needed control, and maybe this was my chance to take it back. Leah had called earlier. "You need to write a letter to the girl left at the altar," she said. "But no names. Don't go after him or her. Make it about you, not him. You're the story." I inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of her words. She was right. It couldn't be about them anymore. It had to be about me, about how it felt to be discarded, to have my life ripped apart by someone I trusted. I began typing. At first my words were slow, hesitant, unsure, but then it came pouring out. I wrote about the jokes that weren't jokes, the way Tyler had chipped away at my confidence, the way I had tried to shrink myself to fit his world. I wrote about how I had spent so much of myself, so much of my love, trying to support his dreams, only to realize that I wasn't part of those dreams. I was just a placeholder until he found someone who fit better into his vision. I didn't name names, no mention of Tyler or Tessa, but anyone who knew us could connect the dots. I paused, staring at the screen, feeling the heat in my chest rise as I read my words. My finger hovered over the publish button. What if this was a mistake? What if Harriet calls me? What if Tyler sues me? The thought of it made my stomach turn. I could already hear the whispers. People would call me petty, attention-seeking. But then, the memory of that group chat came rushing back, the casual cruelty in his words, the way he had dismissed me, reduced me to nothing. And suddenly, I didn't care anymore. The truth was mine to tell, and I wasn't going to let it stay buried. I clicked publish. My phone buzzed almost immediately. Leah's message, "It's live." I sat back, my breath catching in my throat. My words were out there. I couldn't take them back. At first, it was just a few friends sharing it, some familiar faces in my online circle. But then, hours later, someone with a decent following retweeted a quote from my post. Being left at the altar didn't make me unlovable. It just made him honest sooner. And then, it exploded. Comments flooded in, some supportive, some cruel, some from strangers sharing their own stories of abandonment, betrayal, and heartbreak. I cried, then laughed. My post was no longer just mine. It was for everyone who had ever been dismissed or discarded. I sent Leah an email. "Okay, it's out. Now what?" And I sat there, waiting, feeling a shift in the air around me. Something inside of me had cracked open and there was no going back. Now I understand. The hardest part isn't speaking your truth. It's making sure it's heard. The first time I sat across from Daniel West, I wasn't sure what to expect. I had imagined him as some polished, sharp-tongued CEO, the type who would brush me off, maybe ask me about my story with Tyler, or at least acknowledge my pain in some patronizing way. But none of that happened. Instead, Daniel leaned forward, his dark eyes locking with mine, and asked a question I hadn't been asked in years. "What do you want to build now that no one's holding you back?" I froze. No one had ever asked me that before. I had been so used to shrinking myself down, trying to fit into Tyler's world, trying to mold myself to what others expected. But Daniel? He wasn't interested in what had happened. He wasn't interested in the past. He wanted to know what I would do now. The Westline HQ lobby smelled like wood and coffee, the scent of ambition mingling with the comfort of a well-worn space. The walls were lined with climbing photos, people halfway up cliffs, their hands gripping rock, the light playing off their faces in ways that felt daring, inspiring. The kind of place where the stories weren't just told, they were lived. I was sitting in a glass-walled conference room, my knees bouncing with nervous energy, trying to steady myself as I waited for him. The door opened and in walked Daniel. He wasn't wearing a suit, didn't look like the kind of shark Tyler always tried to imitate. Instead, he was dressed in jeans and a button-down shirt, the sleeves rolled up casually. He looked real. Not polished, but approachable. Like someone who actually believed in the people they worked with. Before I could even say a word, he smiled and nodded, referencing something I'd once reworked as an intern, a slogan of all things. "You were right then," he said lightly. "Our sales proved it." I blinked, momentarily thrown off. No one had ever made me feel seen like that, like I had something to offer that mattered. It wasn't condescending, it was respect. Just respect. We dove into the conversation, and it wasn't about Tyler, it wasn't about my ex. He didn't ask about the mess I had just escaped from. Instead, we talked about my blog. Not as some marketing gimmick or clickbait, but as an example of narrative honesty. He spoke like my words had weight, like the raw, vulnerable truth I'd shared was something valuable. "I've been through a divorce myself," he admitted casually, as if it was nothing to hide. "And the people who impress me most aren't the winners or the ones with the best stories to tell. It's the ones who can tell the truth when it hurts them." That struck me. That made me pause. He wasn't just talking about business, he was talking about life. The truth, the messy, painful truth, was something that mattered to him. He outlined the Resilience series, short films, written pieces, community events. The concept was simple but powerful, telling stories of rebuilding after devastation. And then he looked at me, his gaze steady, and asked, "I want you to help find these stories, shape them, maybe even be a part of one, maybe talk about rebuilding after public humiliation." The words hit me in ways I couldn't explain. Public humiliation. It was my story. It was my pain. But he was offering me a place in it, not as a victim, but as someone who could contribute something important. He added quickly, "Only if you're comfortable. No pressure." That line stayed with me. There was no pressure, no rush, just an opportunity to take control of my narrative, to do something bigger than just being a part of someone else's story. When I asked about compensation, Daniel didn't flinch. He didn't minimize my worth like Tyler always had. He called in a finance person immediately, and they walked me through a fair contract. "Make sure you have someone look at it on your side," Daniel added. It was nothing like the way Tyler had dismissed my questions about contracts, rolling his eyes when I asked to read anything. As I left the meeting, the receptionist handed me a visitor badge that read, "Consultant Emma Clark." It felt heavy in my hand, like I was finally becoming something more than just a helper in someone else's dream. I couldn't stop the smile from creeping across my face as I texted Leah. I think my life just shifted. That night, as I stared at the contract on my screen, I messaged Caroline for a quick look. She replied almost instantly, "It's fair, take it. Then decide what else you're willing to take back." And as I sat there, reading the words of the contract, something inside me shifted. There was a future ahead of me, one where I wasn't just a bystander, one where I was in charge of my own story. Now I understand sometimes all it takes is one person to believe in you for you to realize what you're capable of. And sometimes that belief is all you need to find your way back. Exactly 1 year after the wedding that never happened, I sat on a bright studio set, preparing for the kind of interview I'd never thought I'd have. A year ago, I was sitting in an empty church, alone in my white dress. Now, here I was, sitting next to Daniel West on national television, sharing a story I had never imagined telling. The Resilience series had grown, and with it, my life had shifted in ways I couldn't have predicted. I had spent months consulting, writing scripts, and even appearing briefly in a segment about the day I thought my life was over, the day Tyler left me at the altar, and how, in the year that followed, I realized it was just the beginning. Daniel and I had spent countless hours working together. The more we collaborated, the more I found myself drawn to him. It was easy, comfortable. We spent late nights going over edits, early mornings at shoots, and quiet car rides between locations. Somewhere in all of that, we crossed a line, from colleagues to something more. At first, we kept it private, knowing how optics could complicate everything. But by the time the series was picked up for national broadcast, we were engaged. He'd proposed on a rainy hike in the quiet of a forest, asking, Want to keep building things together?" I said yes, thinking of more than just buildings. Now, here we were, on a national morning show, talking about the foundation we were launching to help women rebuilding their lives after abandonment or divorce. It felt surreal, sitting next to Daniel in front of the cameras, my hand resting in his, my heart racing in a way that felt more alive than I'd ever felt before. The host introduced us with a montage of my blog post headlines and clips from the Resilience series. I was in a simple, elegant dress, not the kind of flashy attire Tyler would have preferred, but it felt right. The cameras circled us as we talked, not about Tyler, not about the past, but about choice, dignity, and second chances. For once, I wasn't defined by what had happened to me. I was defined by what I was building. Meanwhile, across town, Tyler was sitting with his friends at a sports bar. I could picture him, talking about how crazy I was, how I'd exaggerated the story of the altar, laughing with them about the whole thing. What he didn't know was that while he was ranting, my face was about to fill a screen in front of him. Suddenly, the bar grew quiet. Someone had noticed. "Hey, isn't that your Emma?" they said. There I was, on TV, my face filling the screen. Daniel stood beside me, his hand steady on my knee, and the lower third graphic read, "Daniel West, founder of Westline Outdoor, and his fiancée, Emma Clark." Tyler's beer slipped from his hand. His friends stared, mouths agape, as the host asked Daniel, "How did you two meet?" Daniel didn't hesitate. She wrote something honest, and I recognized a kind of courage I couldn't ignore. The room at the bar erupted in chatter, one friend muttering, "Dude, that's the guy you worship." Another joked, "You left her and she married your hero?" I could almost feel Tyler's discomfort, his regret, but I said softly into the camera, "Being left at the altar hurt, but sometimes the exit you didn't choose is the entrance you needed." And just like that, the tables had turned. By that afternoon, my phone had become a ticking bomb, a stream of notifications lighting up the screen one after another. 3 emails, 7 text messages, and one long, rambling DM from Tyler. I didn't reply to any of them, not a single one. The silence was the loudest thing I'd ever said to him. The kind of silence that echoes with finality, with everything left unsaid but still felt. The aftermath of the broadcast felt like a tidal wave. Congratulations flooded my inbox from friends and acquaintances. Some were genuine, some were almost too eager, but the one thing that stood out were the screenshots from the sports bar. The ones of Tyler's stunned face when he saw me on TV. Someone had captured the moment he realized, in front of his friends, exactly what he had lost. I couldn't help the small, bitter smile that crossed my face when I saw those photos. It wasn't just a victory for me, it was a lesson for him. But there was something else, something that made my stomach tighten. Harriet had posted a comment on an old photo of us, one from before everything fell apart. It was passive-aggressive, like a thinly veiled jab. "Some people forget where they came from," she had written, a snide remark hidden behind a smile. The irony of it struck me hard. I'm the one who's forgotten where I came from? If only she knew how many times I'd had to rebuild myself from scratch. But I didn't respond. I didn't have to. Then there it was, sitting in my message requests, a Facebook message from Tyler. My heart dropped. I clicked on it without thinking, knowing it was a mistake. "I saw you on TV," it started, and then it spiraled into a tangled mess of words. "I always knew you were special. We were both scared. I thought we'd be okay. I just didn't know how to make it work." There was no mention of the truth I'd exposed, no apology for anything that mattered, no words like, "I'm sorry I lied," no acknowledgement of the years I had wasted, the life I had built around a fantasy. He kept going. "Can we talk? For closure?" Closure. The word hit me like a slap. Closure wasn't something I needed from him. It wasn't something he could offer. It was something I had already taken back from myself, piece by piece. I could almost feel his desperation in those words, the need to tidy up the mess he had made, to smooth over the edges of a life he no longer wanted but still felt entitled to control. The last text came in a few minutes later. "You look incredible. I'm happy for you, really." It was almost laughable. I think about what we could have been. I couldn't help but feel the bitterness rise in my throat. It wasn't regret for hurting me. Not really. It was regret for missing out on an upgrade. He wasn't apologizing. He was mourning the life he thought he could have had, not the one he had thrown away. Harriet's email arrived shortly after. Her flowery, passive-aggressive tone was all too familiar. "You're parading your story to humiliate our family," she wrote, and Tyler was young. "Good Christian women forgive." She didn't mention the group chat, the cruelty in his words, or the money he'd left me with. She didn't acknowledge the truth that I'd exposed. It was all about him, as it always had been. I sat on the couch with Daniel, my laptop open, the smell of coffee wafting in the air. His gentle voice broke through my thoughts. "Do you need to respond?" I shook my head, feeling the weight of his question more than the words themselves. No, I didn't need to respond. I didn't need to engage in this any longer, not with him, not with her. But I paused. There was something inside of me that needed to put this to rest, once and for all. So instead of typing out a response, I did something far more powerful. I forwarded all of Tyler's messages to a private folder labeled "No Response Needed." And then, with one click, I blocked his number. Finally, I opened my blog and began drafting a new post on the difference between closure and contact. The TV screen flickered blue in the bar as my groom's friends went silent, staring at my face instead of his drink. Still, I sat calmly on the studio couch, fingers folded, unaware he was watching the life he thought I'd never reach. As the screen light brightened, my name appeared under a man he worshipped, not the one who left me. While the host smiled and called him my husband, that glow exposed the cost of abandoning me. The same light showed him what waiting a year had built and what leaving had destroyed. That's when he realized I didn't lose a wedding. I upgraded my future. Before we start, I'd love to hear where you're watching from. If you enjoy the story, please hit like, subscribe, and join our community. It really helps us grow. The room was thick with the clink of glasses and the hum of low conversation, a tangle of laughter, the faint sizzle of frying food, and the faint smell of perfume lingered in the air, mixing with the greasy scent of fried appetizers on the table. It was a small, dimly lit back room of a crowded restaurant, one of those places where you can't quite tell if the low lights are hiding the flaws or just adding to the illusion. Either way, the atmosphere felt suffocating, like everyone was trying too hard to be charming. I sat there perched on the edge of my seat, feeling my engagement ring catch the light every time I lifted my glass. The diamond glittered like a promise that felt more like a performance. The moment was supposed to be about celebrating us, but instead it felt like I was being paraded. Harriet, Tyler's mother, clinked her glass, her smile a little too tight. "To my son," she said, her voice just loud enough to carry across the room. "Finally marrying up in beauty, if not in money." The laughter that followed was a little too loud, and the only one who didn't laugh was me. I managed to smile, but the words stung more than I expected. Marrying up? I knew she meant it as a joke, but there was something about the way she said it, something in the way her eyes flicked over me, like I wasn't quite enough. Tyler squeezed my knee under the table, a small gesture that might have been comforting if it didn't feel like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning. "It's not that bad, is it?" I muttered to him, but he didn't respond. Instead, he just smiled and took another sip of his wine, as though the moment was nothing more than a passing discomfort. I knew he was good at ignoring things when they weren't convenient, especially when they came from me. Harriet continued, "You know, Emma's so brave, wearing an off-the-rack dress. No designer for her, but she knows how to make it work, just like her family. Sure knows how to stretch a dollar." Another round of laughter, and I forced my hand to stay still. My grip on the wine glass tightened, and I heard the faintest squeak of the stem in my fingers. She smiled like she'd just given me a compliment. I opened my mouth, but Tyler's knee under the table was pressing against mine, a silent plea to stay quiet. I swallowed the words I wanted to say. His family, his rules. Across the table, Tyler's friends were asking about my job. I could feel their eyes, the way they scanned me as though I were some kind of specimen. I explained, as I had so many times before, that I worked as a marketing coordinator at a small agency, and I ran a tiny blog on the side. Nothing impressive, but it was mine. Before I could say more, Tyler interrupted, cutting in with that casual arrogance of his. "She does cute little posts," he said, glancing at me with a half smile. "It's like therapy for her, really." The words hit me like a slap. Cute little posts? Was that all he thought it was? That blog had been my outlet, my sanctuary. But to him, just another thing to be dismissed, belittled. I smiled weakly, nodding, my voice small. "Yeah, something like that," I murmured, feeling the heat rush to my cheeks. Tyler continued, as though I were just another part of his show. He spent the next few minutes loudly quoting from Daniel West's book, Grind, How to Become a Self-Made Success, which he'd been obsessed with lately. He went on about how he was the next Daniel West, as if everything he'd achieved so far was just a stepping stone to the next level. And this marriage? "Step 1 to a bigger life," he said. "Step 1. I tried to smile through the tension in my chest, but it felt like every word he spoke was a reminder that I wasn't part of his vision. I was just an accessory. When I mentioned that Daniel West had once spoken at my internship and seemed kind, a brief flicker of interest in my voice, Tyler let out a sharp laugh. Sure, you and Dan are basically best friends," he said, rolling his eyes in a way that made the table snicker. I could feel the laughter around me, felt the weight of their gazes, the subtle mockery. Best friends? What was he doing? I barely knew the man, just remembered a few words of kindness from an internship that had felt like a lifetime ago. But here he was, laughing, dismissing it like it was nothing. I took a breath, reaching for my glass again, my fingers trembling ever so slightly. I wasn't even sure what I wanted anymore. A sign? A word? Something to show that Tyler, my fiancé, wasn't the only one in the room whose voice mattered. As I blew out the candles on the cake Harriet insisted on cutting herself, I made a silent wish. It wasn't anything grand or unrealistic. It was simple. That once we were married, things would be different. That somehow we'd be a team. That I'd stop feeling like a token in his life, something to be displayed for show. I didn't realize then that I was wishing for the wrong game entirely. Today, I know that wishes like that are just illusions, wrapped in hope and disappointment. The real change didn't come when I married him. It came when I learned to stop hoping for someone who wasn't going to see me. The restaurant was warm, the kind of cozy Italian place that felt like it belonged to another time. The flickering candlelight cast soft shadows on the walls, the low hum of conversation and clink of flatware blending with the quiet music that floated through the air. It should have been a perfect night. We were supposed to be celebrating, but something about the way Tyler was acting, something that had been building for a while, left an ache deep in my chest. I was sitting at the head of the table, my hands folded in my lap, trying to ignore the tightness in my chest. I wore the white dress I'd picked out for the rehearsal dinner, the one Harriet had called almost elegant. The words still stung. Not quite good enough. Not quite what she expected, but close. That was the theme of the night. Close, but never quite there. Tyler finally walked in 20 minutes late, and I could smell him before I saw him. His usual cologne, of course, but there was something else, something faintly floral, definitely not mine. I felt my stomach twist, but I tried to push it down. He brushed off my worried look with a kiss on my cheek and a joke about putting out fires at the office. He was good at deflecting, good at making everything feel like no big deal, even when it clearly was. I sat there, silent, As he settled into his seat next to me, his hand briefly resting on my knee, a soft pressure that didn't quite comfort but kept the facade intact. Then, as he stood up to give his toast, the room fell quiet, and I could feel my heart racing. "To my beautiful fiancée, Emma," Tyler began, voice carrying over the table. "She's been an absolute joy to deal with these past few months. I've had to survive her mood swings, manage her ridiculously detailed spreadsheets for the budget, and try to fix her career path." Everyone laughed. Everyone except me. The sound of their laughter was a dull roar in my ears, too loud, too quick. It felt like I was watching the whole thing from outside my body, like I wasn't even part of the story. Tyler was making jokes about me, about the parts of myself I'd worked so hard to hold together, and everyone around us thought it was funny. His voice carried on. "Once we're married, I'll finally get her to relax, maybe even get her to take a real job at my company." I looked at my parents. My mom glanced away quickly, her eyes avoiding mine, her hand fidgeting with her wine glass. Dad just stared at his plate, his jaw tight. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, the sting of their silent disapproval. Tyler's words, his jokes, were clearly a hit, but the room was starting to feel smaller, tighter, more suffocating. When it was my turn, I stood up to give a speech. I had prepared something heartfelt, something to show how much I appreciated the people in the room, how much I wanted to build a future together. But before I could get halfway through, Tyler interrupted. He laughed, stood up, and casually said, "If I let her keep going, she'll give us a TED Talk about feelings." Laughter followed, rippling through the crowd, and I felt the weight of it press down on my chest. The words, his words, sliced through me, each one deeper than the last. I tried to smile, but it felt thin, forced. As the night dragged on, I kept trying to shake off the discomfort, but it clung to me. It was like I couldn't escape the constant reminder that I wasn't his equal. I was just a part of the show. Later, when we got into the car, I could feel my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Tyler, those jokes," I started, but he cut me off. "What's wrong now? Too sensitive?" he said with that casual tone, the one that always made me feel like I was being unreasonable for feeling hurt. "Everyone knows I'm kidding. You need to learn to take a joke, Em, especially if you're going to be Mrs. Brooks." The words stung more than I wanted to admit. I was quiet for the rest of the drive, feeling the tension in the air like a thick fog. When we pulled into the parking lot of our apartment, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, distracted. It was an email from Leah. I opened it quickly. "Congratulations on the rehearsal dinner. You deserve someone who sees your value," it read, and attached was a photo of us from our internship days, laughing over coffee, just the two of us. I smiled at the memory, and for a second I felt a glimmer of something real, something that wasn't buried beneath Tyler's dismissive jokes. But then the moment passed. I slipped the phone back into my purse, trying to forget it, trying to believe that Tyler, my fiancé, saw my value. I stood at the back of the church, my bouquet trembling in my hands, the veil pinned perfectly. But nothing about this moment felt right. The air was thick with the scent of flowers and old wood polish, sunlight casting colorful patches on the floor through the stained glass windows. The organist started playing, and the sound was supposed to fill me with joy. Instead, it felt hollow. Then the music stopped, abruptly in the middle of the song. I froze, trying to hold it together, but the whisper that followed, "He's not here," cut through the silence like a knife. My stomach twisted. Guests shifted uncomfortably, checking their programs, their watches. I could hear murmurs, but everything felt muffled, like I was underwater. The coordinator came to speak with my maid of honor, whispering something that made her frown. I didn't have to hear the words to know. Tyler wasn't here. He wasn't answering his phone. My chest tightened. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. My father, standing beside me, shifted his weight nervously. He tried to talk, to ease the tension, but his voice was just a dull echo. I couldn't focus on him. My phone buzzed in my hand, pulling me from my thoughts. "Everything okay?" the text from my friend read. Is he coming? I stared at it, unable to reply, unable to do anything but swallow the lump in my throat. Then Harriet appeared, her smile so tight it barely looked like one at all. "Emma, honey," she said, voice too loud, too reassuring. "He's just delayed traffic. Don't worry, he'll be here any minute." I could feel my heart pounding in my ears, the anxiety choking me. Don't worry. Wasn't that what I'd been doing all along? I hadn't wanted to be a burden, but I was. And now, in front of everyone, in this moment, I was alone. Harriet continued, her voice sharp. "Stop looking so panicked. You've been stressing him about the budget. He just needs a minute." Her words hit me like a slap, and I blinked back tears, trying to hold it together. This wasn't about the budget. This was about him not showing up. Another 30 minutes passed. The guests were no longer trying to hide their discomfort. A few slipped out quietly, pretending not to stare as they left. My heart sank lower with each departure. The officiant finally stepped forward, speaking in a soft, resigned tone. "Maybe we should talk privately." But Harriet, ever the image of control, shook her head quickly, her eyes flickering with panic. "No, we wait. He'll be here. Any second now." I wanted to scream, to ask her how long we were supposed to wait for someone who clearly didn't care enough to show up. But instead, I just stood there, frozen, watching everything unravel. Then my maid of honor came over, holding her phone out to me. "Tyler's message, sent 30 minutes ago. Can't do it. Tell them I'm sorry." The ground beneath me felt like it shifted. My father's hand landed gently on my arm. He squeezed once, then whispered, "We're going home, kiddo." And with that, I turned. The walk down the aisle wasn't a triumph or a celebration. It was the walk of someone abandoned, alone. I woke up in my childhood bedroom, the light outside still soft, barely piercing through the blinds. My eyelids felt heavy, like they'd been painted shut with something thick and dark. As I lifted my hand to wipe my face, I realized the mascara had dried in streaks, crusted on my cheeks. A sharp, bitter taste filled my mouth as I sat up, the remnants of last night's tears still fresh. The room smelled like it always did, laundry detergent mixed with the faint, floral scent of my mom's lotion. The same smells I'd grown up with, the comfort of home, but it felt like a foreign place now. Like I was a visitor, not the girl who'd spent hours in this room, dreaming of a future that no longer existed. My dress hung in the corner of the room, stuffed into a lumpy garment bag like a ghost, a reminder of what was supposed to happen. The dress, the vows, the life I thought I was going to build, it all felt distant now, like a story someone else was telling. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, a harsh intrusion into the silence of the room. I reached for it, the cold screen cool against my fingertips. I had missed several calls, a few texts. I scrolled through them, barely registering the words. Friends offering sympathy. Acquaintances, their concern thinly veiled, trying to navigate the gossip. But then, there was one text from Tyler. I opened it, holding my breath. "I'm sorry, I'll explain when I can." No explanation followed. Just those 5 words, so vague, so distant, that they left a deeper wound than any kind of honesty could have. "I'll explain when I can." A voicemail notification blinked at the top of the screen. I clicked it, already knowing who it was. Harriet's voice crackled through the speaker, sharp and insistent. "Emma, you need to tell people you called it off. For Tyler's reputation. Don't slander him. He's under enormous pressure. You need to take the high road. You're only making this worse." My stomach churned. Tyler's reputation. Harriet was already rewriting the story, controlling the narrative. She wanted me to lie, to protect him. Protect him? What about me? What about the humiliation, the absolute betrayal that was now my reality? But of course, that wasn't what mattered. To her, it was all about how this looked, how this would affect him. Social media was a minefield. My notifications lit up with tagged photos of flowers, empty aisles, and captions like, "Never saw a bride handle it so calmly." I stared at the pictures, the ones I'd been tagged in as though I were a stranger in the images. It was like watching someone else's disaster unfold, and all I could do was stand there, silent, pretending it was just another moment in the story of a woman who didn't exist anymore. I checked my phone again, my heart sinking further as I scrolled through the messages. One from Leah. "Whenever you're ready to talk or to write, you know where to find me." I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. The blinking cursor seemed to mock me, daring me to speak, to do something. But what was there to say? What was left to explain? I typed 2 words. "I'm here." I didn't know what I was waiting for. Maybe for someone to tell me it was okay to feel the way I did, to admit that I didn't need to protect his reputation anymore, that it was okay to let the truth be known. Today, I know that sometimes the truth is the only thing left that's truly mine to own, and it's the only thing that can set you free from the lie you've been living. A few days after everything fell apart, I found myself sitting at my parents' kitchen table, the smell of freshly brewed coffee heavy in the air, the warm steam from the mug curled up, mingling with the tension in the room. I wasn't sure how to process anything anymore. I didn't know how to get out of the constant loop of questions, the feeling of being trapped in a nightmare that kept replaying. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Molly, the coworker who had witnessed so much of my stress leading up to the wedding. "You need to see this. I'm so sorry." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I didn't even need to open the message to feel my pulse spike. I could already sense what it was. It was too much, too soon, but I had to look. I tapped the notification and opened the message. There they were, screenshots from a group chat, Tyler's office group chat. A few lines of text, but enough to make my blood run cold. Molly had sent me 3 screenshots, all messages between Tyler, his best man, and Tessa. The coworker, the one he'd always assured me was just a buddy, the one I had been made to feel insecure about on more than one occasion, but who I never fully questioned because I trusted him. And then I read the messages. Tyler. "I'm leveling up from Sweet Emma to someone who can actually keep up with my goals." The words hit me like daggers. It wasn't about love. It wasn't about being partners. It was about his goals, his image. And I was just someone to be discarded when I didn't fit that image anymore. He continued, "I'll always care about Em, but I can't hitch my life to someone content with mediocrity and a blog that makes no money." Content with mediocrity? A blog that makes no money? The insults were there, hanging in the air like poison. The blog that had been my refuge, my escape, the thing I poured my heart into. And he had dismissed it, dismissed me. But it wasn't just about the blog, it was about me, my family, my life. The inheritance I'd poured into the wedding that he clearly never cared about. I thought it had been about us, about starting a life together, but I'd been wrong. This was about him calculating how to make himself look better, to climb higher. I was a footnote in his ascent, an obstacle to be removed. I scrolled down to the next screenshot. It was a conversation from a few days before the wedding. Tessa asked, "Are you really going through with this?" And Tyler's reply, "Nah, I'm out. Just need to find the right moment. Don't want to nuke the gifts yet, LOL." The casual cruelty of it hit me like a ton of bricks. Don't want to nuke the gifts yet. The wedding I'd planned for months, the one I'd envisioned for years, nothing more than a chance for him to take what he wanted before pulling the rug out from under me. Tears blurred my vision as I read through the rest of the message thread. Molly, seemingly unsure of whether to show me the chat, admitted she'd seen it only because someone had left a laptop open in the break room. She'd recognized my name and felt that something was wrong, so she saved the screenshots, and now she was glad she did. For a long moment, I didn't know how to feel. Part of me was still that girl in the white dress, the one who had hoped, believed, and dreamed of a future with him. The other part of me, the one reading those messages, was starting to harden. He had used me. He had used my love, my trust, my inheritance, and turned it all into a stepping stone for his own climb. I knew what I had to do. I picked up my phone and forwarded the screenshots to Leah. Then I typed, "If I write about this, I don't want him to own the story." I do. That was the turning point. I wasn't going to let him rewrite my story. He'd taken enough from me already. The truth was mine to tell, and I was going to make sure everyone knew exactly who he was. Today, I know that sometimes the hardest thing is finding the strength to take back control over your own narrative. But once you do, nothing can take that power from you. I sat in my apartment, the fridge humming softly in the background, the smell of cold takeout mingling with the stale air. The only light came from my desk lamp, casting long shadows on the floor. It was a weird kind of silence, the kind that feels too loud, like the world is holding its breath while I figure out what comes next. My phone had buzzed once, then twice, but I ignored it. I didn't want distractions. Not now. I stared at the blank post editor on my screen. The blinking cursor seemed to mock me, daring me to type something meaningful. My fingers hovered over the keys. The whole idea of writing felt absurd at first. I thought, maybe 50 people would read it, 50 curious friends or acquaintances who'd found the story through a link. But in the back of my mind, I knew it could be bigger. It was raw. It was real. And maybe, just maybe, it was what I needed to do to feel like I had control again. Because now I understood. Closure didn't come from a conversation or from any of his empty words. It came from inside me, and that was something he would never, ever have the power to take away. It was a Tuesday, an ordinary day. At least, that's how I thought it would be. I was dressed in leggings and an oversized hoodie, my hair tied back in a messy bun, no makeup. I hadn't planned on running into anyone, let alone Tyler. The fluorescent lights of the grocery store buzzed faintly as I pushed my cart down the aisle, mentally ticking off my shopping list. Bananas, yogurt, pasta. Everything felt routine. Everything felt safe. Then, as I turned a corner, my cart bumped into another. I glanced up, ready to apologize, and that's when I saw him. Tyler. For a moment, everything stopped. My heart stuttered in my chest. I hadn't seen him in months, but the second I locked eyes with him, my body remembered the panic, the dread, the feeling of being so small around him. And my mouth? It remembered the boundaries I'd spent so long setting. But none of that mattered now. He was standing there, looking almost like a stranger. He looked smaller, tired even. The confident posture he used to carry so effortlessly had been replaced by something slumped, worn. His eyes flicked down to the engagement ring on my hand, and I saw it. A flash of something in his expression. Regret? Jealousy? I couldn't tell. "Wow," he said, forcing a laugh. "TV star shops here with mortals?" The words landed flat, echoing the way they always had, like he was trying to make a joke at my expense. My stomach tightened, but I stayed silent. His laugh was hollow, and I realized then he hadn't changed. Tyler launched into his speech as if rehearsed, like he had been preparing for this moment, waiting for the right words to soften the sting of everything he'd done. "I'm shocked, but proud," he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "I always knew you'd do something big. I always knew you were special." I thought about the group chat, about the way he had discarded me without hesitation, the way he'd referred to me as training wheels. The irony burned, and I fought to keep my composure. When he asked if we could grab coffee sometime just to clear the air, my breath caught. I hadn't expected it to be this easy for him, this comfortable to pretend like none of it had ever happened, like I hadn't been abandoned at the altar, humiliated in front of everyone I knew. I took a breath, my voice calm but firm. "No, Tyler, I don't need that. I hope you find what you're looking for, but I'm not it. Not anymore." He bristled, the change in his demeanor immediate. He muttered under his breath, "You don't have to be so cold," as if he were entitled to something more. Then, with a final jab, he added, "You know he's older, right? These guys, they like a good story for PR." The words hit me in waves. The implication was clear. To him, I was just a story. I was just a prop in someone else's narrative, something to be discarded when it was no longer convenient. I looked him straight in the eye, the strength rising in me like a wave. He liked my story enough to build something with me, not at my expense. His eyes flickered, but I didn't wait for a response. I wheeled my cart past him, my heart pounding in my chest, but steady. I didn't need him to have the last word, not anymore. In my car afterward, I sat for a moment, feeling the quiet settle in around me. I had expected to shake, to cry, maybe even to feel something heavy and old rising up, but instead I sat there, calm. I reached for my phone and typed a quick message to Daniel. Just ran into a ghost. I'm okay. I realized as I hit send that the test hadn't been about him at all. It had been about me, about remembering I could say no. I could choose to walk away. I wasn't the person I used to be, the one who was scared, the one who shrank. And I wasn't going to let him define me anymore. The morning of my second wedding, there were no grand gestures, no string quartet, no crystal chandeliers, no extravagant guest list. Just a small group of people, a simple dress, and someone who actually showed up on time. The calmness of it all felt like a weight lifting from my chest. No one was here to watch a show. This was just for us. We chose a small outdoor venue with a view of the city park, the early autumn sunlight filtering through the trees. The light was soft, casting a gentle glow on everything around us. The air had a crispness to it, but the sun kept the chill away, making everything feel peaceful and right. It wasn't a lavish setting. It was quiet, just the way I needed it to be. The guest list was small, only those who truly mattered. My family, a few close friends, Leah, Daniel's sister, and her kids. No media, no brands, no sponsors trying to push their agendas. It was just a gathering of the people who knew us best. I wore a simple dress, the kind I had bought for myself. No debt, no pressure, just something that made me feel beautiful without trying to live up to some external standard. As the time approached, my stomach still flipped, but it wasn't fear like before. This time, it was excitement. Real excitement. I was choosing this life, this moment. Before the ceremony, Daniel found me under a maple tree. The vibrant red and orange leaves were beginning to fall around us, creating a perfect backdrop. He gave me that familiar, teasing smile and asked, "Last chance to run?" I laughed, feeling the weight of the past lift a little more. "After last time," I said, my voice steady, "I'm not the one you have to worry about running." We shared a quiet laugh, and it felt like the last thread of tension unraveled between us. I wasn't running anymore. I was ready to stand still, to stand firm. As I walked down the aisle, I remembered the empty aisle from a year ago, the horror of being left alone, abandoned in front of everyone I loved. But this time, Daniel was there. His eyes were wet, but his presence was steady, calm. Leah squeezed my arm as she handed me the bouquet. My father looked lighter, like the burden he'd been carrying for so long had lifted. I could see the relief in his eyes. Our vows were short and simple. We didn't mention altars or abandonment because those were parts of our past we didn't need to drag into this new chapter. Our vows were about choosing each other every day, about building something strong and lasting. No speeches, no grand promises, just us, making a promise to each other. At the small reception, someone joked about selling the rights to our story. Daniel smiled, his voice calm and sure. Emma owns her story outright. And in that moment, I felt like I was finally the author of my own life, not just a character in someone else's. That night, in a quiet hotel room, I fell asleep without wondering if my husband would still be there in the morning. That, I realized, was a luxury I hadn't known I needed. Today, I know. Sometimes the best beginnings come after the hardest endings. Months passed, and life began to settle into a rhythm that no longer revolved around Tyler. But every now and then, something would catch my attention, like a whisper in the back of my mind, reminding me of the past. One day, I saw a screenshot of Tyler's LinkedIn profile. "Seeking new opportunities," it said, in big, bold letters. Below it, the comments told a story he couldn't control anymore. Curiosity pulled me in. I scrolled through the replies. There were a few polite messages, wishing him luck, offering connections, but it was the others that caught my eye, the ones from people who knew the real story. "Looking for something more stable?" One comment read. "Aren't you the one who couldn't even land that big client you were bragging about?" Another said, "Didn't you leave your fiancé at the altar for this?" It wasn't just one comment. It was a thread of them. His reputation, the one he'd spent so many years building on half-truths and exaggerations, was unraveling in front of everyone he'd ever tried to impress. His facade was slipping, and for once, I didn't have to say a word. It was all being said for me. Words started trickling through mutual acquaintances. Tyler's promotion, the one he'd talked about for months, had fallen through. The big client he had boasted about landing had gone to a rival, and his numbers were slipping. His bosses were starting to notice. The same ones who had always overlooked his shortcomings because of his charm and the stories he told were now unimpressed with his tendency to oversell and underdeliver. And then there was Tessa. I hadn't thought about her much, but I heard she'd left him, too. His relationship with her fizzled out, and from what I gathered, it wasn't a clean break. Friends had whispered that she'd grown tired of being the other woman, constantly compared to the one that got away. Tyler had dragged her into our drama whenever my name came up, and eventually she moved to another firm. Meanwhile, Daniel and I were busy building something real. Our foundation had launched fully, focusing on micro-grants to women who were starting over, mentorship programs, and creating a small but engaged online community. It wasn't world-changing, not in the grand sense, but it was tangible. It was real. My blog had grown too, expanding into a platform on resilience, connecting with people who had been through their own struggles, their own moments of humiliation. People who didn't just want a quick fix, but who were committed to rebuilding their lives. Tyler, on the other hand, decided to try his hand at content. He posted long, vague monologues on social media about lessons learned and how people change when they get famous. The engagement was embarrassingly low. Comments trickled in, mostly pointing out the hypocrisy. One person wrote, "Didn't you leave her at the altar?" Another added, "Change is great, but isn't that something you could have done before?" It was like watching someone try to sell a broken product that no one wanted to buy. His reputation, the one he had carefully curated with lies and self-promotion, had turned into a joke. Harriet's social media was no better. Where she used to boast about "my son, the rising star," now it was all heavily filtered pictures of brunches and vague Bible verses about forgiveness. At a mutual friend's baby shower, I noticed her avoiding me as usual, but her eyes kept darting to my engagement ring whenever it caught the light. I felt no satisfaction in it, only pity. She had built an image of the perfect family around her son's success, but the cracks were starting to show. Tyler's professional life was even worse. He bounced between smaller companies, no longer the golden boy he once was. His reputation for being difficult and self-centered followed him everywhere. Without me to prop him up, without my connections, his career was nothing more than a series of false starts. His life, once polished and carefully curated, was now laid bare for all to see. Every choice he had made, every shortcoming he had hidden, was now visible and unimpressive. I saw all this from a distance, mostly through screenshots and secondhand stories, and the feeling that washed over me wasn't triumph. It wasn't joy either. It was validation. His collapse wasn't some dramatic, sudden downfall. It wasn't a lightning strike. It was a house built on ego and shortcuts, finally leaning into itself. And I wasn't the one who had to watch it happen. He did. Today I know. Karma doesn't always come in a flash. Sometimes it's a slow burn, and when it's done, all you're left with is the ashes of a life built on lies. The TV interviews faded away. The headlines moved on. It was just like I'd hoped. The attention that had once swallowed me whole now felt like a distant memory. What mattered now was the quiet of everyday life, the kind that didn't need validation from anyone else. The mornings where my life felt truly mine, without an audience. Our apartment wasn't anything extravagant. It was a high-floor place with plenty of windows and a view that made me feel like I had a front-row seat to the world without being part of its noise. The furniture was mismatched, the shelves cluttered with things we didn't really need but couldn't bring ourselves to part with. There were plants I was slowly learning not to kill, and the air always smelled like coffee or something warm baking in the oven. I didn't have to pretend to be someone I wasn't in here. It was the first place in a long time where I didn't feel like I was auditioning for anyone's approval. I split my time between the foundation, consulting for resilience campaigns, and writing. It wasn't just a side hustle anymore. My income wasn't just cute extra that I used to justify my worth. It was a foundation of our life, something real and stable. Daniel treated it with respect, never diminishing it, never making it a side note. It was mine. And he saw it that way, without trying to make a show of it. We sometimes appeared on panels or did short segments, but we kept it simple, not wanting to turn our relationship into a brand. We said no to reality shows, but we did agree to a small, thoughtful documentary about starting over. It wasn't a spectacle, just a real story about the work we were doing, the change we were creating. It felt good. It felt right. Leah still teased me about being fancy now, but when she talked to me, it was as if nothing had changed. She still joked about sneaking me extra pastries when I was stressing over a pitch, still talked to me like the intern I used to be. There was comfort in that. It reminded me of the person I was before, the person who had yet to discover her worth. Every time my parents saw me, I could feel their relief. They weren't worried about me anymore, not the way they used to be. The kind of quiet concern that made you feel like they were waiting for you to crumble was gone. They saw who I had become, and they didn't need to worry. I was okay, more than okay. I still got messages from women who had been abandoned, lied to, or used. Some of them asked how I got a Daniel. I always answered the same way. The story isn't about him. It's about the years I spent working on myself so that when someone showed up, I was ready. It wasn't about him. It never was. It was about me. On nights when imposter syndrome crept in, I would reread my first post, the one I wrote in my parents' kitchen with shaky hands. She didn't know what was coming. The woman who had written that post. She had no idea she'd be the one to get me here. I was gentle with her in my thoughts because she did the hardest part. She started. Today, I know. Sometimes it's not about the applause. It's about the quiet moments when you realize you're living a life that's yours and yours alone. The TV played softly in the background, the late-night hum barely reaching my ears. I sat on the couch, laptop in my lap, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Tonight, I was drafting another post, this one about how the worst day of my life didn't define all the days that followed. For so long, the day Tyler left me at the altar was the headline in my head, the moment that shattered everything. But now, looking back, it was just the first paragraph of a much longer story. I thought about that empty aisle, the cold stretch of it, the weight of everyone's expectations pressing down on me, my father's arm around me, Harriet's sharp instructions to keep it together, and the heavy, invisible absence of a man who had already left. And then I thought about the year that had passed. Tyler, watching me on TV with Daniel, his hero. That moment wasn't just a twist. It wasn't just a delicious surprise. It was the proof that I had stopped trying to be part of someone else's narrative. I had stopped auditioning for his fantasy. I was writing my own story now. Daniel entered the room, carrying 2 mugs of tea. He kissed the top of my head and set a mug beside me, never asking what I was writing. He trusted me. As I hit publish and closed the laptop, I caught my reflection in the screen. Not a jilted bride, not a CEO's wife, just a woman who had survived and turned that humiliation into something powerful. Today I know. The real revenge wasn't the twist. It was the moment I stopped letting someone else control my story and began owning it.